The wind on K2 has a strange way of carrying stories. Some disappear into the thin air within minutes, others linger for generations. And then there is the story of Dudley Wolfe, a man the mountain kept for 63 years. Most tragedies on K2 begin with a storm, an accident, or a fatal misstep. But Wolfe's story begins quietly, almost politely, with a wealthy Boston gentleman who simply wanted to climb a mountain believed to be unclimbable. In 1939, while Europe braced for war, and the world changed at dizzying speed, Wolfe set his eyes on K2, not for fame, not for records, but for something far more human. To prove maybe to himself that he still mattered. He was nearly 40, divorced twice, searching for meaning. Some said he was running from loneliness. Others said he was chasing glory. But those who met him at base camp insisted he wasn't reckless, just earnest, determined, and painfully unprepared for the world's deadliest mountain. Yet somehow, this quiet man, with no high-altitude experience and a soft New England accent, reached higher than anyone expected. And when the expedition collapsed in chaos, when supplies ran out, when tempers flared, and when the rescuers were sent again and again into hell, Dudley Wolfe remained alone in a tiny tent at Camp 7, waiting for a rescue that would never come. This is the true story of what really happened up there. The mistakes, the courage, the controversy, and the haunting legacy that resurfaced decades later. If you love real mountain history, untold stories, and honest accounts of climbers who paid the ultimate price, you're in the right place. This is K2 Stories. Dudley Wolfe was not a typical mountaineer. He had never scaled the Alps, nor the Karakoram. His life had been comfortable, even privileged. Summers spent sailing the Boston Harbor, winters attending elegant social gatherings. Yet, beneath the polished veneer of wealth, there was a restlessness, a hunger that his quiet New England life could not satisfy. Wolfe's friends described him as charming, but haunted, a man who pursued adventure as a way of confronting emptiness. K2, with its brutal slopes and lethal reputation, called to him like nothing else. In the spring of 1939, Wolfe boarded a ship to India. His journey was filled with excitement and unease. He had invested his savings, hired guides, and secured a place on the expedition led by the seasoned American climber Fritz Wiesner, a man known for his skill, daring, and uncompromising nature. Wiesner had climbed the Himalayas before and carried both the respect and fear of his peers. For Wolfe, following Wiesner was a chance to learn, to survive, to test himself against a peak that had defeated so many others. From the moment Wolfe set foot on the base camp of K2, the mountain tested him. The air was thin, the slopes steep and unrelenting. Every day brought frostbite. Every night brought freezing winds that tore at tents and rattled sleeping bags. Wolfe struggled. Unlike other climbers, who had experience in altitude and ice, he learned through trial and error. Each step required immense concentration. Each breath was a reminder that the mountain did not forgive mistakes. Yet, Wolfe pressed on. In quiet moments, he would retreat into memory, his father's stern lectures about responsibility, the laughter of friends long gone, the loneliness of late nights in empty homes. He imagined proving something not just to the world, but to himself. "I can survive this," he would whisper in the tent, as the storm outside battered the thin canvas. By May, the expedition moved higher into the treacherous reaches of the Karakoram. Wolfe's lack of high-altitude experience became increasingly evident. Wiesner, though patient, grew concerned. He had brought along a strong team of Sherpas and climbers, but the logistics of K2 were unforgiving. Food supplies dwindled faster than expected. Frostbite claimed toes and fingers. And worse, the route itself was far more dangerous than maps or prior reports suggested. Crevices yawned without warning. Ice falls shifted. One misstep could be fatal, and Wolfe, for all his determination, was still learning. One evening at Camp V, Wolfe confided in a Sherpa named Passan Lama, a man whose knowledge of the mountain bordered on instinct. "I feel small," Wolfe said quietly, staring at the jagged silhouette of the upper slopes against a pink sky. "I know I can't control this mountain, but I have to try. I have to reach the summit, Pasang nodded, understanding the human longing behind the words. But he also knew the danger. At 25,000 feet, ambition could kill. At 28,000 feet, it often did. Despite warnings, Wolfe made his way to Camp 6, higher than any American had ever gone. He was now isolated from the main team, dependent on Sherpa support and his own limited knowledge. Blizzard conditions began to appear unpredictably, and the upper reaches of K2 offered no shelter from them. Supplies ran low, and the team had to make difficult choices: push upward and risk everything, or turn back and accept the mountain's defiance. Wolfe, driven by something deeper than fame or ego, chose to keep climbing. At Camp 7, just below the upper ridge, Wolfe finally faced the full might of K2. Winds exceeded 80 miles per hour, temperatures plummeted past -40 F, and oxygen was dangerously scarce. It was here that the limits of human endurance became brutally clear. Wolfe's muscles ached, his fingers numb, and his thoughts began to drift in and out of coherence. The team had no choice but to leave him with supplies, believing he could survive long enough for a rescue attempt. But as hours stretched into days, the rescue became impossible. Wolfe's determination, once his greatest asset, now seemed to tether him to a perilous fate. Back at lower camps, arguments flared among expedition leaders. Could Wolfe be saved? Was the risk too high to attempt a descent in storm conditions? Critics later suggested that Wiesner might have underestimated Wolfe's physical limitations, or perhaps overestimated his willpower. Was it the mountain's fault, Wolfe's, or the tragic result of circumstances that no human could have predicted? This tension, this moral ambiguity, is what made K2 not just a mountain, but a living, judgmental force. The camp tents flapped violently in the wind. Snow drifted like ghostly hands, clawing at the canvas. Wolfe's voice, if it could be heard, was swallowed by the storm. Alone in a tent at 26,000 feet, he became a legend in his own right, not because he survived, but because he dared to stand where almost no one could. His story would remain untold for decades, frozen in ice, until the mountain itself revealed him again. Even in his isolation, Wolfe's presence influenced those around him. Pasang Lama, who had felt both admiration and dread, carried the memory of Wolfe's quiet courage through the years. The other climbers spoke in hushed tones about the American, who had dared the impossible, who had challenged K2 with nothing but willpower and hope. The mountain, indifferent yet exacting, had taken him and left the world to remember. The upper slopes of K2 in 1939 were a theater of extremes, a place where snow and rock conspired against every human ambition. For Dudley Wolfe, each step became an ordeal of endurance, courage, and sheer luck. At Camp 7, isolated and exhausted, he faced the stark reality: the summit was within sight. Yet the mountain demanded a price few were willing or able to pay. Wolfe's determination was relentless. He had invested more than money and time. He had invested his very identity. Every careful step, every shallow breath in the thin air, became a statement. I exist. I am here. I matter. But K2 is unforgiving to such declarations. At 26,000 feet, oxygen levels were a third of what they were at sea level, and hypoxia crept silently, dulling judgment, clouding perception. Wolfe's body, untrained for this altitude, began sending warning signals he could not fully interpret. Trembling limbs, a racing heart, icy numbness that made holding his ice axe feel impossible. Meanwhile, below him, the expedition was torn between caution and ambition. Fritz Wiesner, normally precise and authoritative, wrestled with a dilemma that would haunt him for decades. Could he send Sherpas to rescue Wolfe in the escalating storm, risking their lives, or would leaving him be the only rational choice? The decision was complicated further by logistical constraints. Food supplies were dwindling, ropes were scarce, and the weather was deteriorating at an alarming rate. Every second counted, and the wrong choice could cost multiple lives. As Wolfe prepared to ascend the final stretch toward the summit ridge, the storm intensified. Gusts ripped through tents and frozen ice, whipping powder into white blizzards that reduced visibility to mere feet. Each movement became a battle against gravity, against frostbite, and against disorientation. He was no longer simply climbing a mountain. He was engaged in a life-or-death negotiation with an elemental force that could not be bargained with. Flashbacks haunted Wolfe in those moments. He remembered Boston streets empty in winter, the quiet of his apartment, the long conversations with friends who never understood why he craved more than comfort. He thought of his father's admonitions about caution and prudence, and the irony of ignoring every safety he had once valued. Perhaps, in some cosmic sense, the mountain was asking him to reconcile these memories with the present, a reckoning only the slopes could enforce. Wolfe's mind was a fog of determination and delirium. He spoke aloud to himself, almost as if speaking could anchor him to the world he had left behind. Just a little further, one step, one breath. It was the mantra of climbers across generations. Yet Wolfe's lack of technical experience made each step perilous. The Sherpas, stationed at strategic points, watched from a distance, helpless against the vastness of the mountain and the sudden violence of the storm. Their instinct screamed to move, but their bodies and ethics restrained them. They could not force Wolfe to descend, and any attempt might claim more lives. Hours passed, the world reduced to ice, wind, and a lonely man battling his own mortality. Wolfe's oxygen supplies, already limited, were consumed faster than anticipated. Frostbite began to gnaw at his fingers and toes, making even simple actions excruciating. Yet he pressed on. With each faltering step, he defied Kate's merciless laws, driven by a mixture of courage, obsession, and the haunting question: what if he turned back now and lost not just the summit, but his purpose? At a point later chronicled by survivors, Wolfe had reached what many would consider the point of no return. The terrain was sheer, dangerous, and unyielding. A single miscalculation, a slip, a poorly anchored rope, a sudden gust could cast him down hundreds of feet. The storm's fury left no margin for error, and yet there was something mesmerizing in his movements, the precise application of strength and balance, honed not by experience at such altitudes, but by sheer will. He was learning, adapting, improvising, a human attempting to outwit the mountain itself. Below, the team debated in tense whispers. Wiesner knew that sending rescue parties into the storm might doom everyone, yet leaving Wolfe to fend for himself seemed morally unbearable. The conflict between survival and duty, ambition and compassion, played out in every conversation, every glance exchanged among the climbers, and in that tension, Kate revealed its cruelest lesson. The mountain does not care for morality or desire. It only measures resilience and the limits of human capability. By late afternoon, Wolfe's condition was critical. Hypothermia and hypoxia were exacting their toll. Thoughts became fragmented, memories and hallucinations blurred together. Yet even in this delirium, Wolfe's determination persisted. He imagined himself descending safely, walking back into a world that would never fully understand the magnitude of his struggle. But Keita had other plans. The storm worsened, snowdrifts deepened, and Wolfe's visibility diminished. The once clear path became a maze of ice and rock, each step a gamble. He pressed on, embodying both the triumph and tragedy of human ambition. The mountain witnessed everything. Silently, it catalogued Wolfe's courage, his desperation, and his mistakes. It held his story in frozen memory, waiting decades before revealing the man who had dared, and ultimately failed, in ways no one could easily comprehend. From below, the climbers could only watch, knowing that the story they were witnessing would become legend not because it ended in triumph, but because it was a testament to the human spirit pushed to its extreme. The storm that had been brewing all afternoon turned K2 into a white inferno. The upper slopes were unrecognizable, carved into jagged silhouettes by snow and wind. Wolfe, alone in the swirling chaos, fought against forces far greater than himself. Every step required calculation, yet the margin for error had vanished. His body, already ravaged by frostbite and exhaustion, protested violently. Fingers and toes were numb, every breath was shallow, and his vision blurred with exhaustion and hypoxia. The summit, so close yet impossibly distant, became a mirage that only sharpened his desperation. Below, Fritz Wiesner and the remaining expedition members faced the impossible, the moral calculus of human survival. Could they risk their own lives to retrieve Wolfe? How far could they push the Sherpas? Their only chance of reaching him safely, arguments erupted in hushed, urgent tones. Every word weighed against the unspoken knowledge that Kate demands payment in lives, not gold or glory. The team's supplies were critically low, ropes frayed, and the weather showed no signs of mercy. Every delay increased the danger. Meanwhile, Wolfe pressed upward. His mind wandered through fragments of memory and hallucination. He remembered the Boston harbor, the echoing laughter of old friends, the emptiness of night in empty rooms. These memories intertwined with visions of the summit, of standing above the clouds, touching a peak that no American had yet conquered. It was a hallucination of hope and a cruel reminder of mortality, his mind grasping for meaning, even as his body betrayed him. At one point, a Sherpa stationed at a lower camp glimpsed a shadow moving in the storm. It was Wolfe, barely visible, hunched under layers of clothing, his progress slow and agonizing. The Sherpa's heart sank. Any attempt to ascend would likely claim both their lives. Yet leaving Wolfe alone felt unbearable. Wiesner, experienced yet human, faced an agonizing decision. The Mountaineer's logic demanded that some risks be calculated out of reach. Emotionally, it was impossible. As night fell, Wolfe attempted to bivouac in a narrow snow shelf. He dug shallow trenches to shield himself from the wind, his fingers so frozen he could barely manipulate the tools. Snow lashed against his face, and the howling wind carried an almost sentient malevolence. Each gust threatened to sweep him away. The storm seemed to judge him, each flake a silent sentence. Alone in the thin, deadly air, Wolfe's fight became both physical and moral, a struggle against the inevitability of nature itself. Wiesner and the team at lower camps continued to struggle with guilt and fear. They debated whether sending rescuers was worth the risk. Every decision haunted by the knowledge that Kate had taken many lives before, and would take many more. In letters and memoirs written decades later, Wiesner reflected on these moments with both pride and remorse. He had led Wolfe as far as humanly possible, but the mountain's judgment was absolute. Wolfe's vulnerability, combined with the expedition's limitations and the merciless storm, created a perfect storm of tragedy. Wolfe, in his final hours, reportedly remained conscious for periods. Seemingly aware of the mountain's magnitude, he reportedly left behind traces of hope, footprints that showed deliberate movement, evidence of his attempts to survive. But he also left behind the unmistakable markers of human frailty, frostbite, exhaustion, and the effects of hypoxia. The summit, which had been his beacon, remained tantalizingly out of reach, and K2, indifferent and eternal, held him in its icy grasp. The expedition attempted multiple rescues. Sherpas ascended with ropes and supplies, navigating crevices and shifting ice fields. Each attempt was a dance with death. The storm intensified, winds reaching speeds few had ever survived. Snow and ice created illusions, hiding cliffs and crevices, making every step a gamble. Even the most skilled climbers faced life-threatening peril. Wolfe's isolation at High Camp became both a physical and symbolic representation of human ambition against forces greater than comprehension. Over the following days, the team descended to lower camps, exhausted, injured, and psychologically burdened. They left markers, provisions, and notes, hoping against hope that Wolfe might find a way to survive. But the mountain, silent and unyielding, had already made its decision. Wolfe's body would not be discovered for decades, hidden under ice and snow, a monument to the limits of human endurance and the deadly beauty of K2. In the aftermath, the expedition returned home with mixed emotions. They had pushed the limits of exploration, made incredible progress, yet carried the weight of a human life lost. Historians, mountaineers, and the public debated the circumstances. Was Wolfe reckless? Was the expedition negligent? Or was this simply the immutable law of the mountain, where ambition, circumstance, and nature collide with fatal consequences? Each perspective carried truth. Yet none could fully capture the complexity of that storm, that climb, and that man. Dudley Wolfe became a legend not for his failures, but for his audacity. In a world increasingly defined by comfort and safety, he chose a path where every step could be the last. He embodied the paradox of human ambition, our drive to achieve, to conquer, to leave a mark. Even when the cost is immeasurable, Kate claimed him, but it also immortalized him. His story, hidden under decades of ice and snow, would eventually resurface as a stark reminder of what it truly means to confront the extremes of the natural world. Years passed, and the story of Dudley Wolfe became a whisper among climbers and historians, a cautionary tale of ambition, isolation, and the uncompromising nature of K2. The 1939 expedition faded from public attention, buried beneath more recent feats, disasters, and summits. Yet Wolfe's disappearance lingered in the collective memory of mountaineers who understood, in their bones, the perilous call of the world's second highest peak. For decades, mountaineers would recount the story, a wealthy American climber, driven by obsession, left behind by both the mountain and circumstance. Some saw it as recklessness, a man unprepared for the brutal reality of high-altitude climbing. Others framed it as heroism, a testament to courage and human endurance against an indifferent world. But the truth was more nuanced. Wolfe's ambition was not mere vanity. It was a reflection of a man searching for meaning, for purpose, and perhaps for transcendence above the ordinary confines of life. Kate demanded sacrifices, and Wolfe, like so many before and after him, paid the ultimate price. It wasn't until decades later that his fate would begin to take shape. In the late 20th century, climbers ascending the same slopes began to uncover fragments of the past, remnants of campsites, scattered gear, and eventually, traces of human remains partially preserved by the ice. These discoveries were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet they spoke volumes. They told of a man who had ventured where very few had survived. Someone whose courage was both admirable and tragically flawed. Historians pieced together the evidence, matching sparse written records, personal letters, and expedition notes with these findings. Stories from surviving expedition members added depth to Wolfe's narrative. Fritz Wiesner, reflecting years later, described the torment of leaving Wolfe behind not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The storm, the dwindling supplies, the precarious terrain they left no viable options. The psychological weight of that decision haunted Wiesner, a reminder that leadership in extreme environments carries consequences that extend far beyond the summit. Wolfe's struggle was a mirror for all climbers. Every triumph contains risk. Every decision carries moral and physical weight. Wolfe's legend also influenced climbing culture in subtle ways. His story reminded future generations of the thin line between bravery and hubris, between ambition and recklessness. Expeditions began to emphasize safety, risk assessment, and the importance of recognizing one's limits. Sherpas and guides developed protocols for extreme altitude emergencies, partially inspired by the lessons Wolfe unwittingly imparted. His death was tragic, but it was instructive, a real-world example of what can go wrong when human desire clashes with the immutable laws of nature. Yet Wolfe's legacy was not only cautionary, it was inspirational for climbers of later generations. His story symbolized the audacity required to pursue the extraordinary. In a world increasingly defined by risk aversion, Wolfe's journey reminded people that some goals, no matter how dangerous, are worth striving for. His struggle, etched in ice and memory, became a testament to human courage, endurance, and the relentless drive to confront limits. Even those who would never climb K2 could feel the pull of his story, a narrative that transcended time, geography, and circumstance. The rediscovery of Wolfe's story in the 21st century sparked renewed interest in his expedition. Books, articles, and documentaries explored the 1939 climb, Blending historical research with vivid storytelling, scholars examined the logistical challenges, the personal motivations, and the human drama that unfolded on the upper slopes. Interviews with modern climbers highlighted the enduring relevance of Wolfe's journey. The mountain itself had not changed, and neither had the fundamental risks of high-altitude climbing. Each generation must confront the same elemental truths. Preparation matters, judgment matters, and ultimately, K2's might can overwhelm even the most determined soul. For Wolfe's family and descendants, the story was bittersweet. They had long mourned a life lost too soon, a potential unfulfilled, and a man left behind in the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. Yet there was solace in knowing that his courage, his vision, and his struggle had not been forgotten. Through accounts from historians, mountaineers, and adventurers, Dudley Wolfe's name endured, etched not in the record books of summits alone, but in the narrative of human aspiration and endurance. Against impossible odds, as climbers continue to tackle K to today, they do so with Wolfe's shadow as a guide. They see the risks, the decisions, the moral and physical challenges, and they weigh each choice carefully. Wolfe's story, frozen in time yet alive in lessons, remains a beacon. It teaches that ambition must be tempered with caution, that bravery must be balanced with wisdom, and that sometimes even the most prepared, determined, and courageous individuals can be humbled by forces beyond their control. And yet, perhaps the most compelling part of Dudley Wolfe's story is its humanity. He was not simply a statistic in mountaineering lore. He was a man with dreams, fears, and a relentless desire to test the limits of what was possible. He faced Kate not with arrogance, but with hope. He engaged the mountain not as an enemy, but as an ultimate challenge. And though he did not survive, his journey resonates because it is profoundly human. It speaks to our desire to reach beyond ourselves, to confront the unknown, and to pursue meaning, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Dudley Wolfe's story is more than a tale of ambition and tragedy. It is a mirror reflecting the very essence of human courage. On K2, every step is a negotiation with nature's most unforgiving forces. Wind, ice, altitude, and unpredictability. Wolfe confronted these extremes with determination, resourcefulness, and hope. Yet his fate reminds us that even the bravest and most prepared among us are vulnerable to the mountain's unyielding power. It is a humbling reminder that the pursuit of greatness is inseparable from the respect owed to the world's wildest places. For climbers and enthusiasts today, Wolfe's journey offers timeless lessons. Preparation alone is never enough. Judgment, experience, and the wisdom to know when to turn back are equally critical. The mountain does not bend to desire. It rewards skill, patience, and humility. Wolfe's experience also shows us the psychological challenges inherent in extreme environments. The isolation, the fear, the hallucinations that test both mind and body. These are aspects of mountaineering that cannot be fully simulated or trained, for they are lived, endured, and remembered. Yet, beyond the tragedy, there is inspiration. Wolfe's story speaks to the enduring human spirit, to our willingness to face daunting challenges, to pursue dreams even when the odds are stacked impossibly against us. He symbolizes a universal truth, that the greatest achievements often come with risk, and that the pursuit of the extraordinary is worth understanding, remembering, and honoring. In every story of K2, we find echoes of Wolfe's courage, a reminder of the limits he tested, and the mountains he strove to conquer. As we reflect on Wolfe's legacy, it is also a call to action for all who follow these stories. Engage with history, understand the lessons, and carry them forward not just as spectators, but as participants in a shared human narrative. Each climb, each expedition, each story of survival or loss teaches us something profound about resilience, preparation, and the consequences of choices made in extreme conditions. Dudley Wolfe's journey, frozen in ice yet alive in memory, continues to shape how climbers approach K to today. If Wolfe's story has captivated you, imagine the countless other untold tales hidden in the world's highest peaks. From unsolved mysteries to heroic feats, K2 and other towering mountains are filled with narratives that illuminate human courage and the limits of endurance. By subscribing to K to Stories, you gain access to these incredible accounts, meticulously researched, vividly narrated, and brought to life for viewers who value history, adventure, and the human experience at its most extreme. Join us as we continue to explore the mountains, uncover their secrets, and honor the lives of those who dared to challenge them. Every story is a journey, every summit a lesson, and every climber a reflection of what it truly means to confront the impossible. Stay with us, because the edge of human courage is where K to Stories thrives and where the lessons of legends like Dudley Wolfe continue to inspire us all. Subscribe to K to Stories and witness the untold adventures, tragedies, and triumphs from the world's most formidable peaks. Adventure awaits, but wisdom endures.